14:52 in Helsinki, 12:52 in Dublin and 7:52 in New York City. Adventures of Asterix and Obelix have been translated into over 100 languages ever since the first comic book was published in 1961. The latest language that has been added to the list is Irish. Indeed, books Asterix and the Gael and Asterix and the Golden Sickle have now been published in a language that was actually around in Roman times. And I am joined now by the translator Antain MacLochlainn. Welcome to the programme. How big an audience do you have for these new publications in Irish?
Well, I'd say it's quite a big audience, Marcus. People are crying out for material, people who are sending their children through Irish education, for example, tens of thousands of parents who just need something to read with the children. And, you know, we also anticipate, I suppose, there'll be some interest too from collectors who, you know, collect these books in whatever language they appear in.
Are there any aspects in Asterix and Obelix books that you think would be particularly close to the hearts of Irish people?
Well, somebody said, a journalist for the Irish Times said that Asterix will endear himself to Ulster Unionists because he's fighting the power of Rome, and he'll endear himself to nationalists because he's fighting against an empire. I don't know about that so much, but certainly there's very familiar, I suppose, to a lot of Irish readers, a lot of the details, because this is a Celtic tribe. And a lot of the aspects of their culture are very similar to old Irish literature. Of course, Obelix, his favourite meal is sanglier or wild boar. And that, of course, was the famous, you know, the Finn McCool and other Irish heroes. There's nothing they like more than the exact same dish. So quite a lot of the material, you didn't actually have to make any cultural adjustment at all. It just slotted in very nicely.
And how did you find this project yourself? Had you been reading the adventures of Asterix and Obelix earlier?
I had, yeah. And, I can say it's much more enjoyable than translating an annual general report or anything dry like that. It wasn't without its challenges. There are certain formulas you have to follow when you translate these books, especially as regards the names. The Roman characters had to have names ending in US, which isn't a very common ending in Irish, so it actually gave us some trouble. But the idea is to make them, of course, the Romans are very pompous and very haughty, so the idea is to give them comical names that takes them down a peg or two. So there's a Julius Pompilius and a Tilius Octopus, and I'm afraid to have to say, Marcus, a Marcus Saccopus.
That's great. As you mentioned, translation is not just about replacing words with other words. It's about wider meanings and about culture as well. Besides those names, were there any other aspects about Asterix and Obelix that you found particularly difficult to translate?
Well, something that actually surprised me is, you know, the Irish language, you know, there's a very long history of translation in Irish and a very long history of literature too, but we weren't particularly strong on comic books. You know, you could read Dante in Irish and Chekhov in Irish, but you couldn't read Asterix or Tintin until now. And so one of the problems when I actually sat down to translate this was sound words. And by sound words, I mean things like, you know, in Batman, you know, Batman lands a punch on somebody and there's a kapow or something like this, or a rock falls on somebody and it's kerplunk, you know, these kind of smash bang wallop words. Actually, it was actually very difficult to come up with those because we haven't really got that comic tradition, but we're having to create these onomatopoeic words just off the top of our heads. So there's words here you won't find in any Irish dictionary: smack, crag, crig, clang, and so on. So that was an unexpected difficulty.
That's great. Have you got any feedback yet when you've been using so much creativity with, you know, in coming up with new expressions and so forth? How are the people finding your translation work?
Well, I did actually at the translation stage try them out on a few children. It's nice to have some guinea pigs like about the place, you know, and there didn't seem to be any real problem with comprehension. So it's a tricky one with these books because, you know, even though children love them because the illustrations are so colourful and lively, there is to a level there that appeals more to adults, you know, the wordplay of it. It's a bit like The Simpsons, you know, that the children will appreciate the slapstick nature of it, but the, you know, adults might appreciate the punning more. So you are actually aiming, I suppose, at two audiences in a way when you produce these books, because and it's a strange thing maybe for us because, you know, we don't really have that tradition in Ireland of bande dessinée, of this French language thing of you know, illustrated books for adults.
And what are the plans for the future? Are there going to be more Asterix and Obelix books coming up, or are you going to be busy, say, with other comics?
Well, I would hope so. Yeah, I suppose we just have to see how the sales are. And I should also mention actually that there's a colleague of mine, Gabriel Rosenstock, has also produced translations of a Tintin book. So, we're filling, I suppose you could say, we're making up for lost time in the comic book genre. A number of graphic novels have become available recently, so it's a welcome addition to the literary tradition.
And I'm dying to hear some Irish. I was trying to remember some phrases they would keep on repeating over there, but I can't remember any other ones except for something like, "Where is my magic potion?" How do you say that in Irish?
Cathbhfuil elixir an dríochta.
What other are your favourite phrases in those books?
I suppose I like some of the names a lot. One of the Roman characters we get a lot of fun out of is Laurus Basaris, which actually sounds like a credible kind of Roman name and possibly even an aristocratic name, but Basaris is actually the central bus station in Dublin city centre, which it's not the most aristocratic or romantic building, So there's a lot of wordplay like that. The names of the Roman forts as well were good fun because we had to just redo them because they just didn't work in Irish at all. And so we actually named them we tried to imagine how a legionnaire would feel about being sent to this sort of damp, remote corner of the empire. So the names are all kind of things like Irgulium, which means a wretched, remote place, and Ladranium.
That sounds great. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. That was Antain MacLochlainn, translator, and indeed Asterix and Obelix books are out now. That's all for this week's edition, this day's edition of The Briefing here in London. The show is produced by Carota Repello and researched by Gael, Alice Massoud and Jonathan Bartlett, and the studio manager was Chris Grimes. Thank you for listening.